This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joplin Winter. The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle, Chapter 20. Robin Hood and Guy of Gisborne. A long time passed after the great shooting match, and during that time Robin followed one part of the advice of Sir Robert Lee, to wit, that of being less bold in his comings and goings. For though mayhap he may not have been more honest, as most folks regard honesty, he took good care not to travel so far from Sherwood that he could not reach it both easily and quickly. Great changes had fallen in this time, for King Henry had died, and King Richard had come to the crown that fitted him so well through many hard trials, and through adventures as stirring as any that ever befell Robin Hood. But though great changes came, they did not reach to Sherwood's shades, for there Robin Hood and his men dwelled as merrily as they ever had done, with hunting and feasting and singing and blithe woodland sports, for it was little the outside strivings of the world troubled them. The dawning of a summer's day was fresh and bright, and the birds sang sweetly in a great tumult of sound. So loud was their singing that it awakened Robin Hood where he lay sleeping, so that he stirred and turned and arose. Up rose Little John also, and all the merry men, and then after that they broke their fast, and they set forth hither and thither upon the doings of the day. Robin Hood and Little John walked down a forest path where all around the leaves danced and twinkled as the breeze trembled through them and the sunlight came flickering down. Quoth Robin Hood, "I may make my vow, Little John, my blood tickles my veins as it flows through them this gay morn. What sayest thou to our seeking adventures, each one upon his own account?" "With all my heart," said Little John. "We have had more than one pleasant doing in that way, good master. Here are two paths. Take thou the one to the right hand, and I will take the one to the left, and then let each of us walk straight ahead till he tumbles into some merry doing or other." "I like thy plan," quoth Robin. "Therefore we will part here. But look thee, Little John, keep thyself out of mischief, for I would not have ill befall thee for all the world." "Marry, come up," quoth Little John. "How thou talkest! Methinks thou art wont to give thyself into tighter coils than I am like to do." At this Robin Hood laughed. "Why, in sooth, Little John," said he, "thou hast a blundering, hard-headed way that seemeth to bring thee right side uppermost in all thy troubles. But let us see who cometh out best this day." So saying, he clapped his palm to Little John's, and each departed upon his way, the trees quickly shutting the one from the other's sight. Robin Hood strolled onward till he came to where a broad woodland road stretched before him. Overhead the branches of the trees laced together in flickering foliage, all golden where it grew thin to the sunlight. Beneath his feet the ground was soft and moist from the sheltering shade. Here in this pleasant spot the sharpest adventure that ever befell Robin Hood came upon him. For, as he walked down the woodland path, thinking of naught but the songs of the birds, he came of a sudden to where a man was seated upon the mossy roots beneath the shade of a broad spreading oak tree. Robin Hood saw that the stranger had not caught sight of him, so he stopped and stood quite still, looking at the other a long time before he came forward. And the stranger, I wot, was well worth looking at, for never had Robin Hood seen a figure like that sitting beneath the tree. From his head to his feet he was clad in a horse's hide, dressed with the hair upon it. Upon his head was a cowl that hid his face from sight, and which was made of the horse's skin. The ears were of stuck up like those of a rabbit. His body was clad in a jacket made of the hide, and his legs were covered with the hairy skin likewise. By his side was a heavy broadsword and a sharp double-edged dagger. A quiver of smooth round arrows hung across his shoulders, and his stout bow of yew leaned against the tree beside him. "Hallo, friend!" cried Robin, coming forward at last. "Who art thou that sitteth there? And what is it that thou hast upon thy body? I make my vow I hath never seen such a sight in all my life before. Had I done an evil thing, or did my conscience trouble me, I would be afraid of thee, thinking that thou wast someone from down below, bringing a message bidding me come straightway to King Nicholas." To this speech the other answered not a word, but he pushed the cowl back from his head and showed a knit brow, a hooked nose, and a pair of fierce, restless black eyes, which altogether made Robin Hood think of a hawk as he looked on his face. But besides this, there was something about the lines of the stranger's face, and his thin, cruel mouth, and the hard glare of his eyes, that made one's flesh creep to look upon. "Who art thou, rascal?" said he at last, in a loud, harsh voice. "Tut, "Tut," quoth merry Robin, "speak not so sourly, brother. Hast thou fed upon vinegar and nettles this morning, that thy speech is so stinging?" "And thou likest not my words?" said the other fiercely. "Thou hadst best be jogging, for I tell thee plainly my deeds match them." "Nay, but I do like thy words, thou sweet, pretty thing," quoth Robin, squatting down upon the grass in front of the other. "Moreover, I tell thee thy speech is witty and gamesome as any I ever heard in all my life." The other said not a word, but he glared upon Robin with a wicked and baleful look, such as a fierce dog bestows upon a man ere it springs at his throat. Robin returned the gaze with one of wide-eyed innocence, not a shadow of a smile twinkling in his eyes or twitching at the corners of his mouth. So they sat staring at one another for a long time, until the stranger broke the silence suddenly. "What is thy name, fellow?" said he. "Now," quoth Robin, "I am right glad to hear thee speak, for I began to fear the sight of me had stricken thee dumb. As for my name, it may be this, or it may be that, but methinks it is more meet for thee to tell me thine, seeing that thou art the greater stranger in these parts. Prithee tell me, sweet chuck, why wearest thou that dainty garb upon thy pretty body?" At these words the other broke into a short, harsh roar of laughter. "By thy bones of the Daemon Odin," said he, "thou art the boldest spoken man that ever I have seen in all my life. I know not why I do not smite thee down where thou sittest, for only 2 days ago I skewered a man back at Nottingham town for saying not half so much to me as thou hast done. I wear this garb, thou fool, to keep my body warm. Likewise it is near as good as a coat of steel against a common sword thrust. As for my name, I care not who knoweth it. It is Guy of Gisbourne, and thou mayst have heard it before. I come from the woodlands over in Herefordshire, upon the lands of the Bishop of that ilk. I am an outlaw, and I get my living by hook and by crook in a manner it boots not now tell thee of. Not long since the Bishop sent for me, and said that if I would do a certain thing that the Sheriff of Nottingham would ask of me, he would get me a free pardon and give me 10 score pounds to boot. So straightway I came to Nottingham town, and found my sweet Sheriff, and what thinkest thou he wanted of me? Why, forsooth, to come here to Sherwood to hunt one Robin Hood, also an outlaw, and take him alive or dead. It seemeth that they have no one here to face that bold fellow, so he sent all the way to Herefordshire to me, for thou knowest the old saying, set a thief to catch a thief. As for the slaying of this fellow, it galleth me not a whit, for I would shed the blood of my own brother for the half of 200 pounds. To all this Robin listened, and as he listened his gorge rose. Well he knew of this Guy of Gisbourne, and of all the bloody and murderous deeds that he had done in Herefordshire, for his doings were famous throughout all the land. Yet, although he loathed the very presence of the man, he held his peace, for he had an end to serve. "Truly," quoth he, "I have heard of thy gentle doings. Methinks there is no one in all the world that Robin Hood would rather meet than thee." At this Guy of Gisbourne gave another harsh laugh. "Why," quoth he, "it is a merry thing to think of one stout outlaw like Robin Hood meeting another stout outlaw like the Guy of Gisbourne. Only in this case it will be an ill happening for Robin Hood, for the day he meets Guy of Gisbourne he shall die." "But thou gentle, merry spirit," quoth Robin, "dost thou not think that mayhap this same Robin Hood may be the better man of the two? I know him right well, and many think that he is one of the stoutest men hereabouts." "He may be the stoutest of men hereabouts," quoth Guy of Gisbourne, "yet I tell thee, fellow, this sty of yours is not the wide world. I lay my life upon it I am the better man of the two. He an outlaw, forsooth! Why, I hear that he had never let blood in all his life, saving when he first came to the forest. Some call him a great archer. Marry, I would not be afraid to stand against him all the days of the year with a bow in my hand." "Why, truly, some folk do call him a great archer," said Robin Hood, "but we of Nottinghamshire are famous hands with the longbow. Even I, though but a simple hand at the craft, would not fear to try a bout with thee." At these words Guy of Gisbourne looked upon Robin with wondering eyes, and then gave another roar of laughter till the woods rang. "Now," quoth he, "thou art a bold fellow to talk to me in this way. I like thy spirit in so speaking up to me, for few men have dared to do so. Put up a garland, lad, and I will try a bout with thee." "Tut, "Tut," quoth Robin, "only babes shoot at garlands hereabouts. I will put up a good Nottingham mark for thee." So saying, he arose, and going to a hazel thicket not far off, he cut a wand about twice the thickness of a man's thumb. From this he peeled the bark, and sharpening the point, stuck it up in the ground in front of a great oak tree. Thence he measured off 80 paces, which brought him beside the tree where the other sat. "There," quoth he, "is the kind of mark that Nottingham yeomen shoot at. Now let me see thee split the wand if thou art an archer." Then Guy of Gisbourne arose. "Now out upon it!" cried he. "The devil himself could not hit such a mark as that." "Mayhap he could, and mayhap he could not," quoth merry Robin. "But that we shall never know till thou hast shot thereat." At these words Guy of Gisbourne looked upon Robin with knit brows, but as the yeoman still looked innocent of any ill meaning, he bottled his words and strung his bow in silence. Twice he shot, but neither time did he hit the wand, missing it in the first time by a span, and the second time by a good palm's breadth. Robin laughed and laughed. "I see now," quoth he, "that the devil himself could not hit thy mark. Good fellow, if thou art no better with the broadsword than thou art with the bow and arrow, thou wilt never overcome Robin Hood." At these words Guy of Gisbourne glared savagely upon Robin. Quoth he, "Thou hast a merry tongue, thou villain, but take care that thou makest not too free with it, or I may cut it out with thy throat for thee." Robin Hood strung his bow and took his place with ne'er a word, albeit his heartstrings quivered with anger and loathing. Twice he shot, the first time hitting within an inch of the wand, the second time splitting it fairly in the middle. Then, without giving the other a chance for speech, he flung his bow upon the ground. "There, thou bloody villain!" cried he fiercely. "Let that show thee how little thou knowest of manly sports. And now look thy last upon the daylight, for the good earth hath been befouled long enough by thee, thou vile beast. This day, Our Lady willing, thou diest. I am Robin Hood." So saying, he flashed forth his bright sword in the sunlight. For a time Guy of Gisbourne stared upon Robin as though bereft of wits, but his wonder quickly passed to a wild rage. "Art thou indeed Robin Hood?" cried he. "Now I am glad to meet thee, thou poor wretch. Strive thyself, for thou wilt have no time for striving when I am done with thee." So saying, he also drew his sword. And now came the fiercest fight that ever Sherwood saw, for each man knew that either he or the other must die, and that no mercy was to be had in this battle. Up and down they fought till all the sweet green grass was crushed and ground beneath the trampling of their heels. More than once the point of Robin Hood's sword felt the softness of flesh, and presently the ground began to be sprinkled with bright red drops, albeit not one of them came from Robin's veins. At last Guy of Gisbourne made a fierce and deadly thrust at Robin Hood, from which he leapt back quickly, but in so leaping he caught his heel in a root and fell heavily upon his back. "Now, Holy Mary, aid me!" muttered he, as the other leapt at him with a grin of rage upon his face. Fiercely Guy of Gisbourne stabbed at the other with his great sword, but Robin caught the blade in his naked hand, and though it cut his palm, he turned the point away so that it plunged deep into the ground close beside him. Then, ere a blow could be struck again, he leapt to his feet with his good sword in his hand. And now despair fell upon Guy of Gisbourne's heart in a black cloud, and he looked around him wildly like a wounded hawk. Seeing that his strength was going from him, Robin leapt forward and quick as a flash struck a broad-handed blow behind the sword arm. Down fell the sword from Guy of Gisbourne's grasp, and back he staggered at the stroke, and, ere he could regain himself, Robin's sword passed through and through his body. Round he spun his heels, and flinging his hands aloft with a shrill, wild cry, fell prone upon his face upon the green sod. Then Robin Hood wiped his sword and thrust it back into the scabbard, and coming to where Guy of Gisbourne lay, he stood over him with folded arms, talking to himself at the while. "This is the first man I have slain since I shot the King's forester in the hot days of my youth. I ofttimes think bitterly, even yet, of that first life I took, but of this I am glad as though I had slain a wild boar that lay waste a fair country. Since the Sheriff of Nottingham hath sent such a one as this against me, I will put on the fellow's garb and go forth to see whether I may not find his worship and perchance pay him back some of the debt I owe him upon this score." So saying, Robin Hood stripped the hairy garments from off the dead man, put them on himself, all bloody as they were. Then, strapping the other's sword and dagger around his body, and carrying his own in his hand, together with the two bows of yew, he drew the cowl of horse's hide over his face, so that none could tell who he was, and set forth from the forest, turning his steps toward the eastward and Nottingham town. As he strode along the country roads, men, women, and children hid away from him, for the terror of Guy of Gisbourne's name and of his doings had spread far and near. And now let us see what befell Little John while these things were happening. Little John walked on his way through the forest paths until he had come to the outskirts of the woodlands, where here and there fields of barley, corn, and green meadows lands lay smiling in the sun. So he came to the high road, and to where a little thatched cottage stood, black of cluster and twisted crab trees, with flowers in front of it. Here he stopped of a sudden, for he thought that he heard the sound of someone in sorrow. He listened, and found that it came from the cottage. So, turning his footsteps thither, he pushed open the wicket and entered the place. There he saw a gray-haired dame sitting beside a cold hearthstone, rocking herself to and fro, weeping bitterly. Now, Little John had a tender heart for the sorrows of other folk, so coming to the old woman and patting her kindly upon the shoulder, he spoke comforting words to her, bidding her cheer up and tell him her troubles, for that mayhap he may do something to ease them. At all this the good dame shook her head, but all the same his kind words did soothe her somewhat, so after a while she told him all that bore upon her mind. That morning she had three as fair, tall sons beside her as one could find in all Nottinghamshire, but that they were now taken from her, and were like to be hanged straightway, that one having come upon them, her eldest boy had gone out the night before into the forest and had slain a hind in the moonlight. That the King's rangers had followed the blood upon the grass until they had come to her cottage, and had there found the deer's meat in the cupboard. That, as neither of the younger sons would betray their brother, the forester had taken all three away, in spite of the oldest saying that he alone had slain the deer. That, as they went, she had heard the rangers talking among themselves, saying that the Sheriff had sworn that he would put a check upon the great slaughter of deer that had been going on of late, hanging the first road caught thereupon the nearest tree, and that they would take the three youths to the King's Head Inn, near Nottingham town, where the Sheriff was abiding that day, there to await the return of a certain fellow he had sent into Sherwood to seek for Robin Hood. To all this Little John listened, shaking his head sadly now and then. "Alas," quoth he, when the good dame had finished her speech, "this is indeed an ill case. But who is this that goeth into Sherwood after Robin Hood, and why doth he go to seek him? But no matter for that now, only that I would that Robin Hood were here to advise us. Nevertheless, no time may be lost in sending for him at this hour, if we would save the lives of thy three sons. Tell me, hast thou any clothes hereon that I may put in place of these of Lincoln green? Marry, if our stout Sheriff catches me without disguise, I am like to be run up more quickly than thy sons. Tell me, dame." Then the old woman told him that she had in the house some of the clothes of her good husband, who had only died 2 years before. These she brought to Little John, who, doffing his garb of Lincoln green, put them on instead. Then, making a wig and a false beard of uncarded wool, he covered his own brown hair and beard, and putting on a great tall hat that had belonged to the old peasant, he took his staff in one hand and his bow in the other, and set forth with all the speed to where the Sheriff had taken up his inn. A mile or more from Nottingham town, and not far from the southern borders of Sherwood Forest, stood the cozy inn bearing the sign of the King's Head. Here was a great bustle and stir on this bright morning, for the Sheriff and a score of his men had come to stop there and await Guy of Gisbourne's return from the forest. Great hiss and fuss of cooking was going on in the kitchen, and great rapping and tapping of wine kegs and beer barrels was going on in the cellar. The Sheriff sat within, feasting merrily of the best the place afforded, and the Sheriff's men sat upon the bench before the door, quaffing ale, and lay beneath the shade of a broad spreading oak trees, talking and jesting and laughing. All around stood the horses of the band, with a great noise of stamping feet and the great switching of tails. To this inn came the King's rangers, driving the widow's 3 sons before them. The hands of the 3 youths were tied tightly behind their backs, and a cord from neck to neck fastened them all together. So they were marched to the room where the Sheriff sat at meat, and stood trembling before him as he scowled sternly upon them. "So," quoth he, in a great loud angry voice, "ye have been poaching upon the King's deer, have you? Now I will make short work of you this day, for I will hang up all three of you as a farmer would hang up three crows to scare others of the kind from the field. Our fair county of Nottingham hath been too long a breeding place for such naughty knaves as ye are. I have put up with these things for many years, but now I will stamp them out at once, for all I will with you I will begin." Then one of the poor fellows opened his mouth to speak, but the Sheriff roared at him in a loud voice to be silent, and bade the rangers to take him away till he had done his eating and could attend to the matters concerning them. So the three poor youths were marched outside, where they stood with bowed heads and despairing hearts, till after a while the Sheriff came forth. Then he called his men about him, and quoth he, "These three villains shall be hanged straightway, but not here, lest they breed ill luck to this goodly inn. We will take them over yonder to that belt of woodlands, for I would fain hang them upon the very trees of Sherwood itself, to show these vile outlaws therein what they may expect of me if ever I have the good luck to lay hands upon them." So saying, he mounted his horse, as did his men-at-arms likewise, and all together they set forth for the belt of woodlands he had spoken of, the poor youths walking in their midst, guarded by the rangers. So they came at last to the spot, and here nooses were fastened around their necks of the three, and the ends of the cords flung over the branch of a great oak tree that stood there. Then the three youths fell upon their knees and loudly besought mercy of the Sheriff. But the Sheriff of Nottingham laughed scornfully. "Now," quoth he, "I would that I had a priest here to shrive you, but as none is nigh, you must e'en travel your road with all your sins packed upon your backs, and trust to Saint Peter to let you in through the gates of paradise like three peddlers into the town." In the meantime, while all this had been going forward, an old man had drawn near and stood leaning on his staff, looking on. His hair and beard were all curly and white, and across his back was a bow of yew that looked much too strong for him to draw. As the Sheriff looked around ere he ordered his men to string the three youths up to the oak tree, his eyes fell upon this strange old man, and then his worship beckoned him to say, "Come hither, father, I have a few words to say to thee." So Little John, for it was none other than he, came forward, and the Sheriff looked upon him, thinking that there was something strangely familiar in the face before him. "How now?" said he. "Methinks I have seen thee before. What may thy name be, father?" "Please your worship," said Little John, in a cracked voice like that of an old man, "my name is Giles Hobble, at your worship's service." "Giles Hobble? Giles Hobble?" muttered the Sheriff to himself, turning over the name that he had in his mind to try to find one to fit to this. "I remember not thy name," said he at last, "but it matters not. Hast thou a mind to earn sixpence this bright morn?" "Ay, marry," quoth Little John, "for money is not so plenty with me that I should cast sixpence away, and I could earn it by an honest turn. What is it your worship would have me do?" "Why, this," said the Sheriff. "Here are three men that need hanging as badly as any e'er I saw. If thou wouldst string them up, I will pay thee twopence apiece for them. I like not that my men-at-arms should turn hangmen. Wilt thou try thy hand?" "In sooth," said Little John, still in his old man's voice, "I had never done such a thing before, but and as sixpence is to be earned so easily, I might as well ha' it as anybody. But, your worship, are these naughty fellows strived?" "Nay," said Sheriff, laughing, "never a whit, but thou mayest turn thy hand to that also if thou art so minded. But hasten, I prithee thee, I would get back to mine inn betimes." So Little John came to where the three youths stood trembling, and putting his face to the first fellow's cheek as though he were listening to him, he whispered softly into his ear, "Stand still, brother, when thou feelest thy bands cut, but when thou seest me throw my woolen wig and beard from my head and face, cast thy noose from thy neck and run for the woodlands." Then he slyly cut the cord that bound the youth's hands, who, upon his part, stood still as though he were yet bound. Then he went to the second fellow and spoke to him in the same way, and also cut his bonds. This he did to the third likewise, but all so slyly that the Sheriff, who sat upon his horse laughing, wotted not what was being done, nor his men either. Then Little John turned to the Sheriff. "Please your worship," said he, "will you give me leave to string my bow, for I would fain help these fellows along the way when they are swinging with an arrow beneath the ribs." "With all my heart," said the Sheriff. "Only, as I said before, make thou haste in thy doings." Little John put the tip of his bow to his instep and strung the weapon so deftly that all wondered to see an old man so strong. Next he drew a good smooth arrow from his quiver and fitted it to the string, and then, looking all around to see that the way was clear behind him, he suddenly cast away the wool from his head and face, shouting in a mighty voice, "Run!" Quick as a flash, the three youths flung the nooses from their necks and sped across the open to the woodlands as the arrow speeds from the bow. Little John also flew toward the cover like a greyhound, while the Sheriff and his men gazed after him, all bewildered with the sudden doings. But ere the yeoman had gone far, the Sheriff roused himself. "After him!" he roared in a mighty voice, for he knew now what it was with whom he had been talking, and wondered that he had not known him before. Little John heard the Sheriff's words, and seeing that he could not hope to reach the woodlands before they would be upon him, he stopped and turned suddenly, holding his bow as though he were about to shoot. "Stand back!" cried he fiercely. "The first man that cometh a foot forward, a toucheth finger to bowstring, dieth." At these words the Sheriff's men stood as still as stalks, for they knew right well that Little John would be as good as his word, and that to disobey him meant death. In vain the Sheriff roared at them, calling them cowards and urging them forward in a body. They would not budge an inch, but stood and watched Little John as he moved slowly away toward the forest, keeping his gaze fixed upon them. But when the Sheriff saw his enemy thus slipping betwixt his fingers, he grew mad with rage, so that his head swam and he knew not what he did. Then of a sudden he turned his horse's head, and plunging his spurs into its sides, he gave a great shout, and, rising in his stirrups, came down upon Little John like the wind. Then Little John raised his deadly bow and drew the gray goose feather to his cheek. But alas for him! For ere he could loose the shaft, the good bow that had served him so long split in his hands, and the arrow fell harmless at his feet. Seeing what had happened, the Sheriff's men raised a shout, and, following their master, came rushing down upon Little John. But the Sheriff was ahead of the others, and so caught up with the yeoman before he reached the shelter of the woodlands. Then, leaning forward, he struck a mighty blow. Little John ducked, and the Sheriff's sword turned in his hand, but the flat of the blade struck the other upon the head and smote him down, stunned and senseless. "Now I am right glad," said the Sheriff, when the men came up and found that Little John was not dead, "that I have not slain this man in my haste. I would rather lose 500 pounds than have him die thus instead of hanging, as such a vile thief should do. Go get some water from yonder fountain, Willem, and pour it over his head." The man did as he was bidden, and presently Little John opened his eyes and looked around him, all dazed and bewildered with the stunt of the blow. Then they tied his hands behind him, and lifting him up, set him upon the back of one of the horses, with his face to its tail and his feet strapped beneath its belly. So they took him back to the King's Head Inn, laughing and rejoicing as they went along. But in the meantime the widow's 3 sons had gotten safely away and were hidden in the woodlands. Once more the Sheriff of Nottingham sat with the King's Head Inn. His heart rejoiced within him, for he had at last done that which he had sought to do for years, taken Little John prisoner. Quoth he to himself, "This time tomorrow the rogue shall hang upon the gallows tree in front of the great gate of Nottingham town, and thus shall I make my long score with him even." So saying, he took a deep draught of Canary, but it seemed as if the Sheriff had swallowed a thought with his wine, for he shook his head and put the cup down hastily. "Now," he muttered to himself, "I would not for 1,000 pounds have this fellow slip through my fingers. Yet should his master escape that foul Guy of Gisborne, there is no knowing what he may do, for he is the cunningest knave in all the world, this same Robin Hood. Belike I had better not wait until tomorrow to hang this fellow." So saying, he pushed his chair back hastily, and going forth from the inn, called his men together. Quoth he, "I will not wait no longer for the hanging of this rogue, but it shall be done forthwith, and that from that very tree whence he saved those 3 young villains by stepping betwixt them at the law. So get ye ready straightway." Then once more they sat Little John upon the horse, with his face to the tail, and so, one leading the horse whereon he sat, and the others riding around him, they went forward to that tree from the branches of which they had thought to hang the poachers. On they went, rattling and jingling along the road, till they came to the tree. Here one of the men spoke to the Sheriff of a sudden. "Your worship," cried he, "is not yon fellow coming along toward us that same Guy of Gisborne whom thou didst send in the forest to seek Robin Hood?" At these words the Sheriff shaded his eyes and looked eagerly. "Why, certes," quoth he, "yon fellow is the same. Now Heaven send that he hath slain the master thief, as we will presently slay the man." When Little John heard this speech he looked up, and straightway his heart crumbled away within him, for not only were the man's garments all covered with blood, but he wore Robin Hood's bugle horn and carried his bow and broadsword. "How now!" cried the Sheriff, when Robin Hood in Guy of Gisborne's clothes had come nigh to them. "What luck hath befallen thee in the forest? Why, man, thy clothes are all covered with blood." "And thou likest not my clothes?" said Robin, in a harsh voice like that of Guy of Gisborne. "Thou mayst shut thine eyes. Marry, the blood upon me is that of the vile outlaw that ever trod the woodlands, and one whom I have slain this day, albeit not without wound to myself." Then outspake Little John for the first time since he had fallen into the Sheriff's hands. "O thou vile, bloody wretch! I know thee, Guy of Gisborne, for who is there that hath not heard of thee and cursed thee for the vile deeds of blood and rapine? Is it by such a hand as thine that the gentlest heart that ever beat is stilled in death? Truly thou art a fit tool for this coward Sheriff of Nottingham. Now I die joyfully, nor do I care how I die, for life is naught to me." So spake Little John, the salt tears rolling down his brown cheeks. But the Sheriff of Nottingham clapped his hands for joy. "Now, Guy of Gisborne," cried he, "if what thou tellest me is true, I will be the best day's doing for thee that ever thou hast done in all thy life." "What I have told thee is sooth, and I lie not," said Robin, still in Guy of Gisborne's voice. "Look, is not this Robin Hood's sword, and is not this his good bow of yew, and is not this his bugle horn? Thinkest thou he would have given them to Guy of Gisborne of his own free will?" Then the Sheriff laughed aloud for joy. "This is a good day," cried he. "The great outlaw dead, and his right-hand man in my hands. Ask what thou wilt of me, Guy of Gisborne, and it is thine." "Then this I ask of thee," said Robin. "As I have slain the master, I would now kill the man. Give this fellow's life into my hands, Sir Sheriff." "Now thou art a fool," cried Sheriff. "Thou mightest have had money enough for a knight's ransom if thou hadn't asked for it. I like ill to let this fellow pass from my hands, but as I have promised thou shalt have him." "I thank thee right heartily for thy gift," cried Robin. "Take the rogue down from the horse, men, and lean him against yonder tree while I show you how we stick a porker whence I come." At these words some of the Sheriff's men shook their heads, for though they cared not a whit whether Little John were hanged or not, they hated to see him butchered in cold blood. But the Sheriff called to them in a loud voice, ordering them to take the yeoman down from the horse and lean him against the tree, as the others bade. While they were doing this, Robin Hood strung both his bow and that of Guy of Gisborne, albeit none of them took notice of his doing so. Then, when Little John stood against the tree, he drew Guy of Gisborne's sharp double-edged dagger. Fall back! Fall back!" cried he. "Would ye crowd so on my pleasure, ye unmannerly knaves? Back, I say! Farther yet!" So they crowded back as he ordered, many of them turning their faces away, that they might not see what was about to happen. "Come!" cried Little John. "Here is my breast. It is meet that the same hand that slew my dear master should butcher me also. I know thee, Guy of Gisborne." "Peace, Little John," said Robin in a low voice. "Twice thou hast said thou knowest me, and yet thou knowest me not at all. Couldst thou not tell me beneath this wild beast's hide? Yonder, just in front of thee, lie my bow and arrow, likewise my broadsword. Take them when I cut thy binds. Now, quickly, get them." So saying, he cut the bonds, and Little John, quick as a wink, leapt forward and caught up the bow and arrows and the broadsword. At the same time Robin Hood threw back the cowl of horse's hide from his face and bent Guy of Gisborne's bow with a keen barbed arrow fitted to the string. "Stand back!" cried he sternly. "The first man that toucheth finger to bowstring dieth. I have slain thy man, Sheriff. Take heed that it is not thy turn next." Then, seeing that Little John had armed himself, he clapped his bugle horn to his lips and blew his three blasts, both loud and shrill. Now, when the Sheriff of Nottingham saw whose face it was beneath Guy of Gisborne's hood, and when he heard those bugle notes ring in his ear, he felt as if his hour had come. "Robin Hood!" roared he, and without another word he wheeled his horse in the road and went off in a cloud of dust. The Sheriff's men, seeing their master thus fleeing for his life, thought that it was not their business to tarry longer, so clapping spurs to their horses, they also dashed away after him. But though the Sheriff of Nottingham went fast, he could not outstrip a clothyard arrow. Little John twanged his bowstring with a shout, and when the Sheriff dashed in through the gates of Nottingham town at full speed, a gray goose shaft stuck out behind him like a molting sparrow with one feather in its tail. For a month afterward, the poor Sheriff could sit upon naught but the softest cushion that could be gotten for him. Thus the Sheriff and a score of men ran away from Robin Hood and Little John, so that when Will Stuteley and a dozen or more of stout yeomen burst from out of the cover, they saw naught of their master's enemies. For the Sheriff and his men were scurrying away in the distance, hidden with a cloud of dust like a thunderstorm. Then they all went back into the forest once more, where they found the widow's 3 sons, who ran to Little John and kissed his hands. But it would not do for them to roam the forest at large any more, so they promised that, after they had gone and told their mother of their escape, they would come that night to the greenwood tree, and henceforth become men of the bond. End of chapter 20.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Kara Schallenberg, www.kray.org. The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle. Chapter 9. Robin Hood and Will Scarlet. Thus they travelled along the sunny road, 3 stout fellows, such as you could hardly match anywhere else in all merry England. Many stopped to gaze after them as they strode along, so broad were their shoulders and so sturdy their gait. Quoth Robin Hood to Little John, "Why didst thou not go straight to Ancaster yesterday, as I told thee? Thou hadst not gotten thyself into such a coil hadst thou done as I ordered." "I feared the rain that threatened," said Little John in a sullen tone, for he was vexed at being so chaffed by Robin with what had happened to him. "The rain!" cried Robin, stopping of a sudden in the middle of the road, and looking at Little John in wonder. "Why, thou great oaf, not a drop of rain has fallen these 3 days, neither has any threatened, nor hath there been a sign of foul weather in earth, or sky, or water." "Nevertheless," growled Little John, "the holy Saint Swithin holdeth the waters of the heavens in his pewter pot, and he could have poured them out, had he chosen, even from a clear sky, and wouldst thou have had me wet to the skin?" At this Robin Hood burst into a roar of laughter. "O Little John," said he, "what butter wits hast thou in that head of thine? Who could hold anger against such a one as thou art?" So saying, they all stepped out once more, with the right foot foremost, as the saying is. After they had travelled some distance, the day being warm and the road dusty, Robin Hood waxed thirsty, so, there being a fountain of water as cold as ice, just behind the hedgerow, they crossed the stile and came to where the water bubbled up from beneath a mossy stone. Here, kneeling and making cups of the palms of their hands, they drank their fill, and then, the spot being cool and shady, they stretched their limbs and rested them for a space. In front of them, over beyond the hedge, the dusty road stretched away across the plain. Behind them the meadow-lands and bright green fields of tender young corn lay broadly in the sun, and overhead spread the shade of the cool, rustling leaves of the beechen tree. Pleasantly to their nostrils came the tender fragrance of the purple violets and wild thyme that grew within the dewy moisture of the edge of the little fountain. And pleasantly came the soft gurgle of the water. All was so pleasant and so full of the gentle joy of the bright Maytime that for a long time no one of the 3 cared to speak, but each lay on his back, gazing up through the trembling leaves of the trees to the bright sky overhead. At last Robin, whose thoughts were not quite so busy wool-gathering as those of the others, and who had been gazing around him now and then, broke the silence. "Heyday!" quoth he. "Yon is a gaily feathered bird, I take my vow." The others looked, and saw a young man walking slowly down the highway. Gay was he, indeed, as Robin had said, and a fine figure he cut, for his doublet was of scarlet silk, and his stockings also. A handsome sword hung by his side, the embossed leathern scabbard being picked out with fine threads of gold. His cap was of scarlet velvet, and a broad feather hung down behind and back of one ear. His hair was long and yellow and curled upon his shoulders, and in his hand he bore an early rose, which he smelled at daintily now and then. "By my life," quoth Robin Hood, laughing, "saw ye e'er such a pretty, mincing fellow?" "Truly his clothes have overmuch prettiness for my taste," quoth Arthur a Bland. "But, ne'ertheless, his shoulders are broad, and his loins are narrow, and seest thou, good master, how that his arms hang from his body. They dangle not down like spindles, but hang stiff and bend at the elbow. I take my vow, there be no bread and milk limbs in those fine clothes, but stiff joints and tough thews." "Methinks thou art right, friend Arthur," said Little John. "I do verily think that yon is no such rose-leaf and whipped cream gallant as he would have one take him to be." "Pah!" quoth Robin Hood. "The sight of such a fellow doth put a nasty taste into my mouth. Look how he doth hold that fair flower betwixt his thumb and finger, as he would say, 'Good rose, I like thee not so ill, but I can bear thy odor for a little while.' I take it ye are both wrong, and verily believe that were a furious mouse to run across his path, he would cry, 'La!' or 'Alackaday!' and fall straightway into a swoon. I wonder who he may be." "Some great baron's son, I doubt not," answered Little John, "with good and true men's money lining his purse." "Ay, marry, that is true, I make no doubt," quoth Robin. "What a pity that such men as he, that have no thought but to go abroad in gay clothes, should have good fellows whose shoes they are not fit to tie dancing at their bidding. By Saint Dunstan, Saint Alfred, Saint Withold, and all the good men in the Saxon calendar, it doth make me mad to see such gay lordlings from over the sea go stepping on the necks of good Saxons who owned this land before ever their great-grandsires chewed rind of brawn. By the bright bow of heaven, I will have their ill-gotten gains from them, even though I hang for it as high as e'er a forest tree in Sherwood." "Why, how now, master?" quoth Little John. "What heat is this? Thou dost set thy pot a-boiling, and mayhap no bacon to cook. Methinks yon fellow's hair is over-light for Norman locks. He may be a good man and true, for aught thou knowst." "Nay," said Robin, "my head against a leaden farthing, he is what I say. So lie ye both here, I say, till I show you how I drub this fellow." So saying, Robin Hood stepped forth from the shade of the beech tree, crossed the stile, and stood in the middle of the road with his hands on his hips, in the stranger's path. Meantime the stranger, who had been walking so slowly that all this talk was held before he came opposite the place where they were, neither quickened his pace, nor seemed to see that such a man as Robin Hood was in the world. So Robin stood in the middle of the road, waiting while the other walked slowly forward, smelling his rose, and looking this way and that, and everywhere, except at Robin. "Hold!" cried Robin, when at last the other had come close to him. "Hold! Stand where thou art." "Wherefore should I hold, good fellow?" said the stranger in soft and gentle voice. "And Wherefore should I stand where I am? Ne'ertheless, as thou dost desire that I should stay, I will abide for a short time, that I may hear what thou mayst have to say to me." "Then," quoth Robin, "as thou dost so fairly do as I tell thee, and dost give me such soft speech, I will also treat thee with all due courtesy. I would have thee know, fair friend, that I am, as it were, a votary at the shrine of Saint Wilfrid, who, thou mayst know, took, willy-nilly, all their gold from the heathen, and melted it up into candlesticks. Wherefore, upon such as come hereabouts I levy a certain toll, which I use for better purpose, I hope, than to make candlesticks withal. Therefore, sweet chuck, I would have thee deliver to me thy purse, that I may look into it, and judge, to the best of my poor powers, whether thou hast more wealth about thee than our law allows. For as our good gaffer Swanthold saith, he who is fat from overliving must needs lose blood." All this time the youth had been sniffing at the rose that he held betwixt his thumb and finger. "Nay," said he, with a gentle smile, when Robin Hood had done, "I do love to hear thee talk, thou pretty fellow, and if haply thou art not yet done, finish, I beseech thee. I have yet some little time to stay." "I have said all," quoth Robin, "and now if thou wilt give me thy purse, I will let thee go thy way without let or hindrance, so soon as I shall see what it may hold. I will take none from thee if thou hast but little." "Alas, it doth grieve me much," said the other, "that I cannot do as thou dost wish. I have nothing to give thee. Let me go my way, I prithee. I have done thee no harm." "Nay, thou goest not," quoth Robin, "till thou hast shown me thy purse." "Good friend," said the other gently, "I have business elsewhere. I have given thee much time, and have heard thee patiently. Prithee, let me depart in peace." "I have spoken to thee, friend," said Robin sternly, "and I now tell thee again, that thou goest not one step forward till thou hast done as I bid thee." So saying, he raised his quarterstaff above his head in a threatening way. "Alas," said the stranger sadly, "it doth grieve me that this thing must be. I fear much that I must slay thee, thou poor fellow." So saying, he drew his sword. "Put by thy weapon," quoth Robin. "I would take no vantage of thee. Thy sword cannot stand against an oaken staff such as mine. I could snap it like a barley straw. Yonder is a good oaken thicket by the roadside. Take thee a cudgel thence, and defend thyself fairly, if thou hast a taste for a sound drubbing." First the stranger measured Robin with his eye, and then he measured the oaken staff. "Thou art right, good fellow," said he presently. "Truly, my sword is no match for that cudgel of thine. Bide thee a while till I get me a staff." So saying, he threw aside the rose that he had been holding all this time, thrust his sword back into the scabbard, and, with a more hasty step than he had yet used, stepped to the roadside where grew the little clump of ground oaks Robin had spoken of. Choosing among them, he presently found a sapling to his liking. He did not cut it, but, rolling up his sleeves a little way, he laid hold of it, placed his heel against the ground, and, with one mighty pull, plucked the young tree up by the roots from out the very earth. Then he came back, trimming away the roots and tender stems with his sword as quietly as if he had done naught to speak of. Little John and the tanner had been watching all that passed, but when they saw the stranger drag the sapling up from the earth, and heard the rending and snapping of its roots, the tanner pursed his lips together, drawing his breath between them in a long inward whistle. "By the breath of my body," said Little John, as soon as he could gather his wits from their wonder, "sawest thou that, Arthur? Marry, I think our poor master will stand but an ill chance with yon fellow. By Our Lady, he plucked up yon green tree as it were a barley straw." Whatever Robin Hood thought, he stood his ground, and now he and the stranger in scarlet stood face to face. Well did Robin Hood hold his own that day as a mid-country yeoman. This way and that they fought, and back and forth, Robin's skill against the stranger's strength. The dust of the highway rose up around them like a cloud, so that at times Little John and the Tanner could see nothing, but only hear the rattle of the staves against one another. Thrice Robin Hood struck the stranger, once upon the arm, and twice upon the ribs, and yet he warded all the other's blows, only one of which, had it met its mark, would have laid stout Robin lower in the dust than he had ever gone before. At last the stranger struck Robin's cudgel so fairly in the middle that he could hardly hold his staff in his hand. Again he struck, and Robin bent beneath the blow. A third time he struck, and now not only fairly beat down Robin's guard, but gave him such a rap also, that down he tumbled into the dusty road. "Hold!" cried Robin Hood, when he saw the stranger raising his staff once more. "I yield me." "Hold!" cried Little John, bursting from his cover, with the Tanner at his heels. "Hold! Give over, I say." "Nay," answered the stranger quietly. "If there be two more of you, and each as stout as this good fellow, I am like to have my hands full. Nevertheless, come on, and I will strive my best to serve you all." "Stop!" cried Robin Hood. "We will fight no more. I take my vow this is an ill day for thee and me, Little John. I do verily believe that my wrist and eke my arm are palsied by the jar of the blow that this stranger struck me." Then Little John turned to Robin Hood. "Why, how now, good master?" said he. "Alas, thou art in an ill plight. Marry, thy jerkin is all befouled with the dust of the road. Let me help thee to arise." "A plague on thy aid!" cried Robin angrily. "I can get to my feet without thy help, good fellow." "Nay, but let me at least dust thy coat for thee. I fear thy poor bones are mightily sore," quoth Little John soberly, but with a sly twinkle in his eyes. "Give over, I say," quoth Robin in a fume. "My coat hath been dusted enough already without aid of thine." Then, turning to the stranger, he said, "What may be thy name, good fellow?" "My name is Gamwell," answered the other. "Ha!" cried Robin. "Is it even so? I have near kin of that name. Whence camest thou, fair friend?" "From Maxfield town I come," answered the stranger. "There I was born and bred, and thence I come to seek my mother's young brother, whom men call Robin Hood. So, if perchance thou mayst direct me—" "Ha! Will Gamwell!" cried Robin, placing both hands upon the other's shoulders, and holding him off at arm's length. "Surely it can be none other. I might have known thee by that pretty maiden air of thine, that dainty, finicking manner of gait. Dost thou not know me, lad? Look upon me well." "Now, by the breath of my body," cried the other, "I do believe from my heart that thou art mine own Uncle Robin. Nay, certain it is so." And each flung his arms around the other, kissing him upon the cheek. Then once more Robin held his kinsman off at arm's length, and scanned him keenly from top to toe. "Why, how now?" quoth he. "What change is here? Verily, some 8 or 10 years ago I left thee a stripling lad, with great joints and ill-hung limbs, and lo, here thou art, as tight a fellow as e'er I set mine eyes upon. Dost thou not remember, lad, how I showed thee the proper way to nip the goose feather betwixt thy fingers, and throw out thy bow arm steadily? Thou gavest great promise of being a keen archer. And dost thou not mind how I taught thee to fend and parry with the cudgel?" "Yea," said young Gamwell, "and I did so look up to thee, and thought thee so above all other men that, I make my vow, had I known who thou wert, I would never have dared to lift hand against thee this day. I trust I did thee no great harm." "No, no," quoth Robin hastily, and looking sideways at Little John. "Thou didst not harm me. But say no more of that, I prithee. Yet I will say, lad, that I hope I may never feel again such a blow as thou didst give me. By 'r Lady, my arm doth tingle yet from finger nail to elbow. Truly, I thought that I was palsied for life. I tell thee, coz, that thou art the strongest man that ever I laid mine eyes upon. I take my vow, I felt my stomach quake when I beheld thee pluck up yon green tree as thou didst. But tell me, how camest thou to leave Sir Edward and thy mother?" "Alas," answered young Gamwell, "it is an ill story, uncle, that I have to tell thee. My father's steward, who came to us after old Giles Crookleg died, was ever a saucy varlet, and I know not why my father kept him, saving that he did oversee with great judgment. It used to gall me to hear him speak up so boldly to my father, who, thou knowest, was ever a patient man to those about him, and slow to anger and harsh words. Well, one day, and an ill day it was for that saucy fellow, he sought to berate my father, I standing by. I could stand it no longer, good uncle, so, stepping forth, I gave him a box of the ear, and, wouldst thou believe it, the fellow straightway died o't. I think they said I broke his neck, or something o' the like. So off they packed me to seek thee and escape the law. I was on my way when thou sawest me, and here I am." "Well, by the faith of my heart," quoth Robin Hood, "for anyone escaping the law, thou wast taking it the most easily that ever I beheld in all my life. Whenever did anyone in all the world see one who had slain a man, and was escaping because of it, tripping along the highway like a dainty court damsel, sniffing at a rose the while?" "Nay, uncle," answered Will Gamwell, "overhaste never churned good butter, as the old saying hath it. Moreover, I do verily believe that this overstrength of my body hath taken the nimbleness out of my heels. Why, thou didst but just now rap me thrice, and I thee never a once, save by overbearing thee by my strength." "Nay," quoth Robin, "let us say no more on that score. I am right glad to see thee, Will, and thou wilt add great honor and credit to my band of merry fellows. But thou must change thy name, for warrants will be out presently against thee. So, because of thy gay clothes, thou shalt henceforth and for aye be called Will Scarlet." "Will Scarlet," quoth Little John, stepping forward and reaching out his great palm, which the other took. "Will Scarlet, the name fitteth thee well. Right glad am I to welcome thee among us. I am called Little John, and this is a new member who has just joined us, a stout tanner named Arthur a Bland. Thou art like to achieve fame, Will, let me tell thee, for there will be many a merry ballad sung about the country, and many a merry story told in Sherwood, of how Robin Hood taught Little John and Arthur a Bland the proper way to use the quarterstaff. Likewise, as it were, how our good master bit off so large a piece of cake that he choked on it." "Nay, good Little John," quoth Robin gently, for he liked ill to have such a jest told of him. "Why should we speak of this little matter? Prithee, let us keep this day's doings among ourselves." "With all my heart," quoth Little John. "But, good master, I thought that thou didst love a merry story, because thou hast so often made a jest about a certain increase of fatness on my joints, of flesh gathered by my abiding with the Sheriff of—" "Nay, good Little John," said Robin hastily, "I do bethink me I have said full enough on that score." "It is well," quoth Little John, "for in truth I myself have tired of it somewhat. But now I bethink me, thou didst also seem minded to make a jest of the rain that threatened last night. So—" "Nay, then," said Robin Hood testily, "I was mistaken. I remember me now it did seem to threaten rain." "Truly I did think so myself," quoth Little John. "Therefore, no doubt, thou dost think it was wise of me to abide all night at the Blue Boar Inn, instead of venturing forth in such stormy weather, dost thou not?" "A plague of thee and thy doings!" cried Robin Hood. "If thou wilt have it so, thou wert right to abide wherever thou didst choose." "Once more it is well," quoth Little John. "As for myself, I have been blind this day. I did not see thee drubbed, I did not see thee tumbled heels over head in the dust, and if any man says that thou wert, I can with a clear conscience rattle his lying tongue betwixt his teeth." "Come," cried Robin, biting his nether lip, while the others could not forbear laughing, "we will go no farther to-day, but will return to Sherwood, and thou shalt go to Ancaster another time, Little John." So said Robin, for now that his bones were sore, he felt as though a long journey would be an ill thing for him. So, turning their backs, they retraced their steps whence they came. End of Chapter 9. Read by Kara Schallenberg on January 24th, 2006, in Oceanside, California.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle. Part first, telling how the Sheriff of Nottingham swore that he would deal dole to Robin Hood. Also how he made 3 trials thereat, but missed each time by a good bow's length. Chapter 2. Robin Hood and the Tinker. Now it was told before how £200 were set upon Robin Hood's head, and how the Sheriff of Nottingham swore that he himself would seize Robin, both because he would fain have the £200, and because the slain man was a kinsman of his own. Now the Sheriff did not yet know what a force Robin had about him in Sherwood, but thought that he might serve a warrant for his arrest as he could upon any other man that had broken the laws. Therefore he offered 80 golden angels to anyone who would serve this warrant. But men in Nottingham town knew more of Robin Hood and his doings than the Sheriff did, and many laughed to think of serving a warrant upon the bold outlaw, knowing well that all they would get for such service would be cracked crowns, so that no one came forward to take the matter in hand. Thus a fortnight passed, in which time none came forward to do the Sheriff's business. Then said he, "A right good reward have I offered to whosoever would serve my warrant upon Robin Hood, and I marvel that no one has come to undertake the task." Then one of his men, who was near him, said, "Good master, thou wottest not the force that Robin Hood has about him, and how little he cares for warrant of king or sheriff. Truly, no one likes to go on this service for fear of cracked crowns and broken bones." "Then I hold all Nottingham men to be cowards," said the Sheriff, "and let me see the man in all Nottinghamshire that dared disobey the warrant of our sovereign lord King Harry. For by the shrine of Saint Edmund I will hang him 40 cubits high. But if no man in Nottingham dare win 80 angels, I will send elsewhere, for there should be men of mettle somewhere in this land." Then he called upon a messenger in whom he placed great trust, and bade him saddle his horse and make ready to go to Lincoln town, to see whether he could find anyone there who would do his bidding and win the reward. So that same morning the messenger started forth upon his errand. Bright shone the sun upon the dusty highway that led from Nottingham to Lincoln, stretching away all white over hill and dale. Dusty was the highway, and dusty the throat of the messenger, so that his heart was glad when he saw before him the sign of the Blue Boar Inn, when somewhat more than half his journey was done. The inn looked fair to his eyes, and the shade of the oak trees that stood around it seemed cool and pleasant. So he alighted from his horse to rest himself for a time, calling for a pot of ale to refresh his thirsty throat. Then he saw a party of right jovial fellows seated beneath the spreading oak that shaded the greensward in front of the door. There was a tinker, 2 barefoot friars, and a party of 6 of the king's foresters, all clad in Lincoln green, and all of them were quaffing humming ale and singing merry ballads of the good old times. Loud laughed the foresters as jests were bandied about between the singing, and louder laughed the friars, for they were lusty men with beards that curled like the wool of black rams. But loudest of all laughed the tinker, and he sang more sweetly than any of the rest. His bag and his hammer hung upon a twig of the oak tree, and near by leaned his good stout cudgel, as thick as his wrist and knotted at the end. "Come," cried one of the foresters to the tired messenger, "come join us for this shot. Ho, landlord, bring a fresh pot of ale for each man." The messenger was glad enough to sit down along with the others who were there, for his limbs were weary and the ale was good. "Now, what news bearest thou so fast?" quoth one, "and whither ridest thou today?" The messenger was a chatty soul, and loved a bit of gossip dearly. Besides, the pot of ale warmed his heart, so that, settling himself in an easy corner of the inn bench, while the host leaned upon the doorway and the hostess stood with her hands beneath her apron, he unfolded his budget of news with great comfort. He told all from the very first: how Robin Hood had slain the forester, and how he had ridden in the greenwood to escape the law; how that he lived therein, all against the law, God wot, slaying his Majesty's deer and levying toll on fat abbot, knight, and esquire, so that none dare travel even on broad Watling Street or the Fosse Way for fear of him; how that the sheriff had a mind to serve the king's warrant upon this same rogue, though little would he mind warrant of either king or sheriff, for he was far from being a law-abiding man. Then he told how none could be found in all Nottingham town to serve this warrant, for fear of cracked pates and broken bones, and how that he, the messenger, was now upon his way to Lincoln town, to find of what mettle the Lincoln men might be. "Now come I, forsooth, from good Banbury town," said the jolly tinker, "and no one nigh Nottingham, nor Sherwood either, and that be the mark, can hold cudgel with my grip. Why, lads, did I not meet that mad wag Simon of Ely, even at the famous fair at Hertford town, and beat him in the ring at the same place before Sir Robert of Leslie and his lady? This same Robin Hood, of whom I wot I never heard before, is a right merry blade. But gin he be strong, am I stronger? And gin he be sly, am I not slyer? Now by the bright eyes of Nan of the Mill, and by mine own name, and that's Wat o' the Crabstaff, and by mine own mother's son, and that's myself, will I, even I, Wat o' the Crabstaff, meet this same sturdy rogue, and gin he mind not the seal of our glorious sovereign King Harry and the warrant of the good Sheriff of Nottinghamshire, I will so bruise, beat, and bemaul his pate that he shall never move finger or toe again. Hear ye that, bully boys?" "Now art thou the man of my farthing," cried the messenger, "and back thou goest with me to Nottingham town." "Nay," quoth the tinker, shaking his head slowly from side to side, "go I with no man gin it be not with mine own free will." Nay, nay, said the messenger, no man is there in Nottinghamshire could make thee go against thy will, thou brave fellow. Ay, that be I brave, said the tinker. Ay, marry, said the messenger, thou art a brave lad, but our good sheriff hath offered 80 angels of bright gold to whosoever shall serve the warrant upon Robin Hood, though little good will it do. Then I will go with thee, lad. Do but wait till I get my bag and hammer and my cudgel. Ay, let me but meet this same Robin Hood, and let me see whether he will not mind the king's warrant. So, after having paid their score, the messenger, with the tinker striding beside his nag, started back to Nottingham again. One bright morning, soon after this time, Robin Hood started off to Nottingham town to find what was a-doing there, walking merrily along the roadside where the grass was sweet with daisies, his eyes wandering and his thoughts also. His bugle horn hung at his hip, and his bow and arrows at his back, while in his hand he bore a good stout oaken staff, which he twirled with his fingers as he strolled along. As thus he walked down a shady lane, he saw a tinker coming, trolling a merry song as he drew nigh. On his back hung his bag and his hammer, and in his hand he carried a right stout crabstaff, full 6 feet long, and thus sang he: In peace cod time, when hound to horn gives ear till buck be killed, and little lads with pipes of corn sit keeping beasts afield. Hallo, good friend, cried Robin. I went to gather strawberries. Hallo, cried Robin again, by woods of Grays full fair. Oh, hallo, art thou deaf, man? Good friend, say I. And who art thou, dost so boldly check a fair song? Quoth the tinker, stopping in his singing. Hallo thine own self, whether thou be good friend or no. But let me tell thee, thou stout fellow, gin thou be a good friend, it were well for us both. But gin thou be no good friend, it were ill for thee. And whence comest thou, my lusty blade? Quoth Robin. I come from Banbury, answered the tinker. Alas, quoth Robin, I hear there is sad news this merry morn. Ha! Is it indeed so? Cried the tinker eagerly. Prithee tell it speedily, for I am a tinker by trade, as thou seest, and as I am in my trade I am greedy for news, even as a priest is greedy for farthings. Well then, quoth Robin, list thou, and I will tell, but bear thyself up bravely, for the news is sad, I wot. Thus it is, I hear that 2 tinkers are in the stocks for drinking ale and beer. Now, a murrain seize thee and thy news, thou scurvy dog, for thou speakest but ill of good men. But sad news it is indeed, gin there be 2 stout fellows in the stocks. Nay, said Robin, thou hast missed the mark, and dost but weep for the wrong sow. The sadness of the news lieth in that there be but 2 in the stocks, for the others do roam the country at large. Now, by the pewter platter of St. Dunstan, cried the tinker, I have a good part of a mind to baste thy hide for thine ill jest. But gin men be put in the stocks for drinking ale and beer, I trow thou wouldst not lose thy part. Loud laughed Robin and cried, Now, well taken, tinker, well taken. Why, thy wits are like beer, and do froth up most when they grow sour. But right art thou, man, for I love ale and beer right well. Therefore come straightway with me hard by the sign of the Blue Boar, and if thou drinkest as thou appearest, and I wot thou wilt not belie thy looks, I will drench my throat with as good home brewed as ever was tapped in all broad Nottinghamshire. Now, by my faith, said the tinker, thou art a right good fellow in spite of thy scurvy jests. I love thee, my sweet chuck, and gin I go not with thee to that same Blue Boar, thou mayst call me a heathen. Tell me thy news, good friend, I prithee, quoth Robin, as they trudged along together, for tinkers, I ween, are as full of news as an egg of meat. Now I love thee as my brother, my bully blade, said the tinker, else I would not tell thee my news. For sly am I, man, and I have in hand a grave undertaking that doth call for all my wits. For I come to seek a bold outlaw that men hereabouts call Robin Hood, Within my pouch I have a warrant, all fairly written out on parchment, forsooth, with a good red seal, for to make it lawful. Could I but meet this same Robin Hood, I would serve it upon his dainty body, and if he minded it not, I would beat him till every one of his ribs would cry Amen. But thou livest hereabouts. Mayhap thou knowest Robin Hood thyself, good fellow." "Ay, marry, that I do somewhat," quoth Robin, "and I have seen him this very morn. But, Tinker, men say that he is but a sad, sly thief. Thou hadst better watch thy warrant, man, or else he may steal it out of thy very pouch." "Let him but try," cried the Tinker. "Sly may he be, but sly am I too. I would I had him here now, man to man." And he made his heavy cudgel to spin again. "But what manner of man is he, lad?" "Much like myself," said Robin, laughing, "and in height and build and age nigh the same, and he hath blue eyes too." "Nay," quoth the Tinker, "thou art but a green youth. I thought him to be a great bearded man. Nottingham men feared him so." "Truly, he is not so old nor so stout as thou art," said Robin, "but men do call him a right deft hand at quarterstaff." "That may be," said the Tinker right sturdily, "but I am more deft than he, for did I not overcome Simon of Ely in a fair bout in the ring at Hertford town? But if thou knowest him, my jolly blade, wilt thou go with me and bring me to him? 80 bright angels hath the sheriff promised me if I serve the warrant upon the knave's body, and 10 of them will I give to thee if thou showest me him." "Ay, that I will," quoth Robin, "but show me thy warrant, man, until I see whether it be good or no." "That will I not do, even to mine own brother," answered the Tinker. "No man shall see my warrant till I serve it upon yon fellow's own body." "So be it," quoth Robin, "and thou show it not to me, I know not to whom thou wilt show it. But here we are at the sign of the Blue Boar, so let us in and taste his brown October." No sweeter inn could be found in all of Nottinghamshire than that of the Blue Boar. None had such lovely trees standing around, or was so covered with trailing clematis and sweet woodbine. None had such good beer and such humming ale, nor in winter time, when the north wind howled and snow drifted around the hedges, was there to be found elsewhere such a roaring fire as blazed upon the hearth of the Blue Boar. At such times might be found a goodly company of yeomen or country folk seated around the blazing hearth, bandy merry jests, while roasted crab apples bobbed in bowls of ale upon the hearthstone. Well known was the inn to Robin Hood and his band, for there had he and such merry companions as Little John or Will Stutely or young David of Doncaster often gathered when all the forest was filled with snow. As for mine host, he knew how to keep a still tongue in his head, and to swallow his words before they passed his teeth, for he knew very well which side of his bread was spread with butter, for Robin and his band were the best of customers, and paid their scores without having them chalked up behind the door. So now, when Robin Hood and the Tinker came thereto, and called aloud for 2 great pots of ale, none would have known from look or speech that the host had ever set eyes upon the outlaw before. "Bide thee here," quoth Robin to the Tinker, "while I go and see that mine host draweth ale from the right butt, for he hath good October, I know, and that brewed by Withold of Tamworth." So saying, he went within and whispered to the host to add a measure of Flemish strong waters to the good English ale, which the latter did, and brought it to them. "By Our Lady," said the Tinker, after a strong draught of the ale, "yon same Withold of Tamworth, a right good Saxon name too, I'd have you know, breweth the most humming ale that ever passed the lips of Wat o' the Crabstaff." "Drink, man, drink," cried Robin, only wetting his own lips meanwhile. "Ho, landlord, bring my friend another pot of the same. And now for a song, my jolly blade." "Ay, that will I give thee a song, my jolly fellow," quoth the Tinker, "for I never tasted such ale in all my days before. By Our Lady, it doth make my head hum even now. Hey, dame hostess, come listen, and thou wouldst hear a song, and thou too, thou bonny lass, for never do I sing as well as when bright eyes do look upon me the while. Then he sang an ancient ballad of the time of good King Arthur, called The Marriage of Sir Gawaine, which you may sometime read yourself in stout English of early times. And as he sang, all listened to that noble tale of noble knight and his sacrifice to his king. But long before the tinker came to the last verse, his tongue began to trip and his head to spin, because of the strong waters mixed with the ale. First his tongue tripped, then it grew thick of sound, then his head wagged from side to side, until at last he fell asleep, as though he would never waken again. Then Robin laughed aloud, and quickly took the warrant from out the tinker's pouch with his deft fingers. "Sly art thou, tinker," quoth he, "but not yet, I bow, art thou as sly as that same sly thief Robin Hood." Then he called the host to him and said, "Here, good man, are 10 broad shillings for the entertainment thou hast given us this day. See that thou takest good care of thy fair guest there, and when he wakes thou mayest again charge him 10 shillings also, and if he hath it not, thou mayest take his bag and hammer, and even his coat, in payment. Thus do I punish those that come into the greenwood to deal dole to me. As for thine own self, never knew I a landlord yet that would not charge twice, an he could." At this the host smiled slyly, as though saying to himself the rustic saw, "Teach a magpie to suck eggs." The tinker slept until the afternoon drew to a close, and the first shadows grew long beside the woodland edge. Then he awoke. First he looked up, then he looked down, then he looked east, and then he looked west, for he was gathering his wits together, like barley straws blown apart by the wind. First he thought of his merry companion, but he was gone. Then he thought of his stout crab-staff, and that he had within his hand. Then of his warrant, and of the 80 angels he was to gain for serving it upon Robin Hood. He thrust his hand into his pouch, but not a scrap nor a farthing was there. Then he sprang to his feet in a rage. "Ho, landlord!" cried he, "whither hath that knave gone that was with me but now?" "What knave meaneth your worship?" quoth the landlord, calling the tinker worship to soothe him, as a man would pour oil upon angry water. "I saw no knave with your worship, for I swear no man would dare call that man knave so nigh to Sherwood Forest. A right stout yeoman I saw with your worship, but I thought that your worship knew him, for few there be about here that pass him by and know him not. Now how should I, that ne'er have squealed in your sty, know all the swine therein? Who was he then, and thou knowest him so well?" "Why, yon same is a right stout fellow whom men hereabouts do call Robin Hood, which same—" "Now, by Our Lady," cried the tinker hastily, in a deep voice, like an angry bull, "thou didst see me come into thine inn, I, a staunch honest craftsman, and never told me who my company was, well knowing thine own self who he was. Now I have a right round piece of mind to crack thy knave's pate for thee." Then he took up his cudgel and looked at the landlord as though he would smite him where he stood. "Nay," cried the host, throwing up his elbow, for he feared the blow, "how knew I thou knewest him not?" "Well and truly thankful mayst thou be," quoth the tinker, "that I be a patient man, and so do spare thy bald crown, else wouldst thou ne'er cheat customer again. But as for this same knave Robin Hood, I go straightway to seek him, and if I do not score his knave's pate, cut my staff into faggots and call me woman." So saying, he gathered himself together to depart. "Nay," quoth the landlord, drawing in front of him and holding out his arms like a gooseherd driving his flock, for money made him bold, "thou goest not till thou hast paid me my score." "But did he not pay thee?" "Not so much as 1 farthing, and 10 good shillings worth of ale have ye drunk this day. Nay, I say, thou goest not away without paying me, else shall our good sheriff know of it." But naught have I to pay thee with, good fellow, quoth the tinker. Good fellow, not me, said the landlord. Good fellow am I not when it cometh to lose 10 shillings. Pay me that thou owest me in broad money, or else leave thy coat and bag and hammer. Yet I wot they are not worth 10 shillings, and I shall lose thereby. Nay, an thou stirrest, I have a great dog within, and I will loose him upon thee. Macon, open thou the door, and let forth Brian, if this fellow stirs one step. Nay, quoth the tinker, for by roaming the country he'd learnt what dogs were. Take thou what thou wilt have, and let me depart in peace, and may a murrain go with thee. But, O landlord, an I catch yon scurvy varlet, I swear he shall pay full with usury for that he hath had. So saying, he strode away toward the forest, talking to himself, while the landlord and his worthy dame and Macon stood looking after him, and laughed when he'd fairly gone. Robin and I stripped yon ass of his pack main neatly, quoth the landlord. Now it happened about this time that Robin Hood was going through the forest to Fosse Way, to see what was to be seen there, for the moon was full, and the night gave promise of being bright. In his hand he carried his stout oaken staff, and at his side hung his bugle horn. As thus he walked up a forest path, whistling, down another path came the tinker, muttering to himself, and shaking his head like an angry bull. And so, at a sudden bend, they met sharply face to face. Each stood still for a time, and then Robin spoke. "Hallo, my sweet bird," said he, laughing merrily. "How likest thou thine ale? Wilt not sing to me another song?" The tinker said nothing at first, but stood looking at Robin with a grim face. "Now," quoth he at last, "I am right glad I have met thee, and if I do not rattle thy bones within thy hide this day, I give thee leave to put thy foot upon my neck." "With all my heart," cried merry Robin. "Rattle my bones an thou canst." So saying, he gripped his staff and threw himself upon his guard. Then the tinker spat upon his hands, and, grasping his staff, came straight at the other. He struck 2 or 3 blows, but soon found that he'd met his match, for Robin warded and parried all of them, and before the tinker thought, he gave him a rap upon the ribs in return. At this Robin laughed aloud, and the tinker grew more angry than ever, and smote again with all his might and main. Again Robin warded 2 of the strokes, but at the third his staff broke beneath the mighty blows of the tinker. "Now ill tide thee, traitor staff," cried Robin, as it fell from his hands. "A foul stick art thou to serve me thus in mine hour of need." "Now yield thee," quoth the tinker, "for thou art my captive, and if thou do not, I will beat thy pate to a pudding." To this Robin Hood made no answer, but, clapping his horn to his lips, he blew 3 blasts loud and clear. "Ay," quoth the tinker, "blow thou mayest, but go thou must with me to Nottingham town, for the sheriff would fain see thee there. Now wilt thou yield thee, or shall I have to break thy pretty head?" "An I must drink sour ale, I must," quoth Robin, "but never have I yielded me to man before, and that would wound or mark upon my body. Nor, when I bethink me, will I yield now. Ho, my merry men, come quickly!" Then from out of the forest leaped Little John, and 6 stout yeomen clad in Lincoln green. "How now, good master," cried Little John, "what need hast thou that thou dost wind thy horn so loudly?" "There stands a tinker," cried Robin, "that would fain take me to Nottingham, there to hang upon the gallows tree." "Then shall he himself hang forthwith," cried Little John, and he and the others made at the tinker to seize him. "Nay, touch him not," said Robin, "for a right stout man is he. A metal man is he by trade, and a mettled fellow by nature. Moreover, he doth sing a lovely ballad. Say, good fellow, wilt thou join my merry men all? 3 suits of Lincoln green shalt thou have a year, besides 40 marks in fee. Thou shalt share all with us, and lead a right merry life in the greenwood. For cares have we not, and misfortune cometh not upon us within the sweet shades of Sherwood, where we shoot the dun deer and feed upon venison and sweet oaten cakes, and curds and honey. Wilt thou come with me?" "Ay, marry, will I join with you all," quoth the Tinker, "for I love a merry life, and I love thee, good master, though thou didst thwack my ribs and cheat me into the bargain. Fain am I to own thou art both a stouter and a slyer man than I, so I will obey thee, and be thine own true servant." So all turned their steps to the forest depths, where the Tinker was to live henceforth. For many a day he sang ballads to the band, until the famous Allan a Dale joined them, before whose sweet voice all others seemed as harsh as a raven's. But of him we will learn hereafter. End of chapter 2.
My men the other, so that if one falleth into the king's hands, the others may haply escape. We will go by devious ways, and so, I hope, will reach Sherwood in safety. And now, Sir Page, I wish thee farewell." "Farewell, thou bold yeoman," said Partington, "and mayst thou reach thy hiding in safety." So each shook the other's hand, and the lad, turning his horse's head, rode back toward London, while Robin entered the inn once more. There he found his yeoman sitting in silence, waiting his coming. Likewise the landlord was there, for he was curious to know what Master Partington had to do with the fellow in blue. "Up, my merry men," quoth Robin. "This is no place for us, for those are after us with whom we will stand but an ill chance, and we fall into their hands. So we will go forward once more, nor will we stop this night till we reach St. Albans." Hereupon, taking out his purse, he paid the landlord his score, and so they left the inn. When they had come to the high road without the town, Robin stopped and told them all that had passed between young Partington and himself, and how that the king's men were after them with hot heels. Then he told them that here they should part company, they three going to the eastward and he to the westward, and so, skirting the high main roads, would come by devious paths to Sherwood. "So be ye wily," said Robin Hood, "and keep well away from the northward roads till ye have gotten well to the eastward. And thou, Will Scarlet, take the lead of the others, for thou hast a cunning turn to thy wits." Then Robin kissed the three upon the cheeks, and they kissed him, and so they parted company. Not long after this, a score or more of the king's men came clattering up to the door of the inn at Barnet Town. Here they leaped from their horses and quickly surrounded the place, the leader of the band and 4 others entering the room where the yeoman had been. But they found that their birds had flown again, and that the king had been balked a second time. "Methought that they were naughty fellows," said the host, when he heard whom the men-at-arms sought. "But I heard that blue-clad knave say that they would go straight forward to St. Albans. So, an ye hurry forward, you may, perchance, catch them on the high road twixt here and there." For this news the leader of the band thanked mine host right heartily, and calling his men together, mounted and set forth again, galloping forward to St. Albans upon a wild goose chase. After Little John and Will Scarlet and Allan a Dale had left the highway near Garnet, they travelled toward the eastward without stopping as long as their legs could carry them, until they came to Chelmsford in Essex. Thence they turned northward, and came through Cambridge and Lincolnshire to the good town of Gainsborough. Then, striking to the westward and the south, they came at last to the northern borders of Sherwood Forest, without in all that time having met so much as a single band of the king's men. 8 days they journeyed thus ere they reached the woodlands in safety, but when they got to the greenwood glade, they found that Robin had not yet returned. For Robin was not as lucky in getting back as his men had been, as you shall presently hear. After having left the great northern road, he turned his face to the westward, and so came past Aylesbury to fair Woodstock in Oxfordshire. Then he turned his footsteps northward, travelling for a great distance by way of Warwick Town, till he came to Dudley in Staffordshire. 7 days it took him to journey thus far, and then he thought he had gotten far enough to the north. So, turning toward the eastward, shunning the main roads, and choosing byways and grassy lanes, he went, by way of Lichfield and Ashby de la Zouch, toward Sherwood, until he came to a place called Stanton. And now Robin's heart began to laugh aloud, for he thought that his danger had gone by, and that his nostrils would soon snuff the spicy air of the woodlands once again. But there is many a slip betwixt the cup and the lip, and this Robin was to find, for thus it was. When the king's men found themselves foiled at St. Albans, and that Robin and his men were not to be found high nor low, they knew not what to do. Presently another band of horsemen came, and another, until all the moonlit streets were full of armed men. Betwixt midnight and dawn another band came to the town, and with them came the Bishop of Hereford. When he heard that Robin Hood had once more slipped out of the trap, he stayed not a minute, but gathering his bands together, he pushed forward to the northward with speed, leaving orders for all the troops that came to St. Albans to follow after him without tarrying. On the evening of the 4th day he reached Nottingham town, and there straightway divided his men into bands of 6 or 7, and sent them all through the countryside, blocking every highway and byway to the eastward and the southward and the westward of Sherwood. The Sheriff of Nottingham called forth all his men likewise, and joined with the bishop, for he saw that this was the best chance that had ever befallen of paying back his score in full to Robin Hood. Will Scarlet and Little John and Allan a Dale had just missed the king's men to the eastward, for the very next day after they had passed the line and entered Sherwood, the roads through which they had travelled were blocked, so that had they tarried in their journeying, they would surely have fallen into the bishop's hands. But of all this Robin knew not a whit, so he whistled merrily as he trudged along the road beyond Stanton, with his heart as free from care as the yolk of an egg is from cobwebs. At last he came to where a little stream spread across the road in a shallow sheet, tinkling and sparkling as it fretted over its bed of golden gravel. Here Robin stopped, being athirst, and, kneeling down, he made a cup of the palms of his hands, and he began to drink. On either side of the road, for a long distance, stood tangled thickets of bushes and young trees, and it pleased Robin's heart to hear the little birds singing therein, for it made him think of Sherwood, and it seemed as though it had been a lifetime since he had breathed the air of the woodlands. But all of a sudden, as he thus stooped, drinking, something hissed past his ear, and struck with a splash into the gravel and water beside him. Quick as a wink, Robin sprang to his feet, and at one bound crossed the stream and the roadside, and plunged headlong into the thicket without looking around, for he knew right well that that which had hissed so venomously near beside his ear was a gray goose shaft, and that to tarry so much as a moment meant death. Even as he leaped into the thicket, 6 more arrows rattled among the branches after him, one of which pierced his doublet, and would have struck deeply into his side but for the tough coat of steel that he wore. Then up the road came riding some of the king's men at headlong speed. They leaped from their horses and plunged straightway into the thicket after Robin. But Robin knew the ground better than they did, so crawling here, stooping there, and anon running across some little open, he soon left them far behind, coming out at last upon another road about 800 paces distant from the one he had left. Here he stood for a moment, listening to the distant shouts of the 7 men as they beat up and down in the thickets, like hounds that had lost the scent of the quarry. Then, buckling his belt more tightly around his waist, he ran fleetly down the road toward the eastward and Sherwood. But Robin had not gone more than 3 furlongs in that direction when he came suddenly to the brow of a hill, and saw beneath him another band of the king's men seated in the shade along the roadside in the valley beneath. Then he paused not a moment, but, seeing that they had not caught sight of him, he turned and ran back whence he had come, knowing that it was better to run the chance of escaping those fellows that were yet in the thickets than to rush into the arms of those in the valley. So back he ran with all speed, and having gotten safely past the thickets, when the 7 men came forth into the open road, they raised a great shout when they saw him, such as the hunter gives when the deer breaks cover. But Robin was then a quarter of a mile and more away from them, coursing over the ground like a greyhound. He never slackened his pace, but ran along mile after mile, till he had come nigh to Mackworth, over beyond the Derwent River, nigh to Derby town. Here, seeing that he was out of present danger, he slackened in his running, and at last sat him down beneath the hedge, where the grass was the longest and the shade the coolest, there to rest and catch his wind. "By my soul, Robin," quoth he to himself, "that was the narrowest miss that e'er thou hadst in all thy life. I do say most solemnly that the feather of that wicked shaft tickled mine ear as it whizzed past. This same running hath given me a most craving appetite for victuals and drink. Now I pray Saint Dunstan that he send me speedily some meat and beer." It seemed as though Saint Dunstan was like to answer his prayer, for along the road came plodding a certain cobbler, one Quince of Derby, who had been to take a pair of shoes to a farmer nigh Kirk Langley, and was now coming back home again, with a fair boiled capon in his pouch, and a stout pottle of beer by his side, which same the farmer had given him for joy of such a stout pair of shoon. Good Quince was an honest fellow, but his wits were somewhat of the heavy sort, like unbaked dough, so that the only thing that was in his mind was, 3 shillings 6 halfpenny for thy shoon, good Quince, 3 shillings 6 halfpenny for thy shoon, and this travelled round and round inside of his head, without another thought getting into his noddle, as a pea rolls round and round inside an empty quart pot. "Hullo, good friend!" quoth Robin from beneath the hedge, when the other had gotten nigh enough. "Whither away so merrily this bright day?" Hearing himself so called upon, the cobbler stopped, and seeing a well-clad stranger in blue, he spoke to him in seemly wise. "Give ye good den, fair sir, and I would say that I come from Kirk Langley, where I has sold my shoon, and got 3 shillings 6 halfpenny for them, and as sweet money as ever thou sawest, and honestly earned too, I will have thee know. But an I may be so bold, thou pretty fellow, what dost thou there beneath the hedge?" "Marry," quoth merry Robin, "I sit beneath the hedge here to drop salt on the tails of golden birds, but in sooth thou art the first chick of any worth I have seen this blessed day." At these words the cobbler's eyes opened big and wide, and his mouth grew round with wonder, like a knothole in a board fence. "Slack a day," quoth he, "look ye now, I have never seen these same golden birds. And dost thou in sooth find them in these hedges, good fellow? Prithee tell me, are there many of them? I would fain find them mine own self." "Aye, truly," quoth Robin, "they are as thick here as fresh herring in Cannock Chase." "Look ye now," said the cobbler, all drowned in wonder, "and dost thou in sooth catch them by dropping salt on their pretty tails?" "Yea," quoth Robin, "but this salt is of an odd kind, let me tell thee, for it can only be gotten by boiling down a quart of moonbeams in a wooden platter, and then one hath but a pinch. But tell me now, thou witty man, what hast thou gotten there in that pouch by thy side, and in that pottle?" At these words the cobbler looked down at those things of which merry Robin spoke, for the thoughts of the golden bird had driven them from his mind, and it took him some time to scrape the memory of them back together again. "Why," said he at last, "in the one is good March beer, and in the other is a fat capon. Truly, Quince the cobbler will have a fine feast this day, and I mistake not." "But tell me, good Quince," said Robin, "hast thou a mind to sell those things to me? For the hearing of them sounds sweet in mine ears. I will give thee these gay clothes of blue that I have upon my body, and 10 shillings to boot, for thy clothes, and thy leather apron, and thy beer and thy capon. What sayest thou, bully boy?" "Nay, thou dost jest with me," said the cobbler, "for my clothes are coarse and patched. Thine are of fine stuff and very pretty." "Never a jest do I speak," quoth Robin. "Come, strip thy jacket off, and I will show thee, for I tell thee I like thy clothes well. Moreover, I will be kind to thee, for I will feast straightway upon the good things thou hast with thee, and thou shalt be bidden to the eating." At these words he began slipping off his doublet, and the cobbler, seeing him so in earnest, began pulling off his clothes also, for Robin Hood's garb tickled his eye. So each put on the other fellow's clothes, and Robin gave the honest cobbler 10 bright new shillings. Quoth merry Robin, "I have been a many things in my life before, but never have I been an honest cobbler. Come, friend, let us fall to and eat, for something within me cackles aloud for that good fat capon." So both sat down and began to feast right lustily, so that when they were done the bones of the capon were picked as bare as charity. Then Robin stretched his legs out with a sweet feeling of comfort within him. Quoth he, "By the turn of thy voice, good Quince, I know that thou hast a fair song or two running loose in thy head like colts in a meadow. I prithee, turn one of them out for me." "A song or two I have," quoth the cobbler. Poor things, but such as they are, thou art welcome to one of them." So, moistening his throat with a swallow of beer, he sang, "Of all the joys the best I love, sing hey, my frisking Nano, and that which most my soul doth move, it is the clicking cano. All other bliss I'd throw away, sing hey, my frisking Nano." But this... The stout cobbler got no farther in his song, for of a sudden 6 horsemen burst upon them where they sat, and seized roughly upon the honest craftsman, hauling him to his feet, and nearly plucking the clothes from him as they did so. "Ha!" roared the leader of the band, in a great big voice of joy. "Have we then caught thee at last, thou blue-clad knave? Now blessed be the name of St. Hubert, for we are 80 pounds richer this minute than we were before. For the good Bishop of Hereford hath promised that much to the band that shall bring thee to him. Oh, thou cunning rascal! Thou wouldst look so innocent, forsooth! We know thee, thou old fox! But off thou goest with us to have thy brush clipped forthwith." At these words the poor cobbler gazed all around him with his great blue eyes as round as those of a dead fish, while his mouth gaped as though he had swallowed all his words, and so lost his speech. Robin also gaped and stared in a wondering way, just as the cobbler would have done in his place. "Alack-a-daisy me!" quoth he. "I know not whether I be sitting here or in no man's land. What meaneth all this stir of the pot, my dear good gentleman? Surely this is a sweet, honest fellow." "Honest fellow, sayest thou, clown?" quoth one of the men. "Why, I tell thee that this is that same rogue that men call Robin Hood." At this speech the cobbler stared and gaped more than ever, for there was such a threshing of thoughts going on within his poor head that his wits were all befogged with the dust and chaff thereof. Moreover, as he looked at Robin Hood, and saw the yeoman look so like what he knew himself to be, he began to doubt, and to think that mayhap he was the great outlaw in real sooth. Said he in a slow, wondering voice, "Am I in very truth that fellow? Now I had thought, but nay, Quince, thou art mistook. Yet am I? Nay, I must indeed be Robin Hood. Yet truly I had never thought to pass from an honest craftsman to such a great yeoman." "Alas," quoth Robin Hood, Look ye there now. See how your ill treatment hath curdled the wits of this poor lad and turned them all sour. I myself am Quince, the cobbler of Derby town." "Is it so?" said Quince. "Then, indeed, I am somebody else, and can be none other than Robin Hood. Take me, fellows, but let me tell you that ye have laid hand upon the stoutest yeoman that ever trod the woodlands." "Thou wilt play madman, wilt thou?" said the leader of the band. "Here, Giles, fetch a cord and bind this knave's hands behind him. I warrant we will bring his wits back to him again when we get him safe before our good bishop at Tutbury Town." Thereupon they tied the cobbler's hands behind him, and led him off with a rope, as the farmer leads off the calf he hath brought from the fair. Robin stood looking after them, and when they were gone, he laughed till the tears rolled down his cheeks, for he knew that no harm would befall the honest fellow, and he pictured to himself the bishop's face when good Quince was brought before him as Robin Hood. Then, turning his steps once more to the eastward, he stepped out, right foot foremost, toward Nottinghamshire and Sherwood Forest. But Robin Hood had gone through more than he wotted of. His journey from London had been hard and long, and in a same night he had travelled 70 and more of miles. He thought now to travel on without stopping until he had come to Sherwood, but ere he had gone 50 of miles he felt his strength giving way beneath him, like a river bank which the waters have undermined. He sat him down and rested, but he knew within himself he could go no farther that day, for his feet felt like lumps of lead, so heavy were they with weariness. Once more he arose and went forward, but after travelling a couple of miles he was fain to give the matter up. So, coming to an inn just then, he entered, and calling the landlord, bade him show him to a room, although the sun was only then just sinking in the western sky. There were but 3 bedrooms in the place, and to the meanest of these the landlord showed Robin Hood. But little Robin cared for the looks of the place, for he could have slept that night upon a bed of broken stones. So, stripping off his clothes without more ado, he rolled into the bed and was asleep almost ere his head touched the pillow. Not long after Robin had so gone to his rest, a great cloud peeped blackly over the hills to the westward. Higher and higher it arose until it piled up into the night like a mountain of darkness. All around beneath it came ever and anon a dull red flash, and presently a short grim mutter of the coming thunder was heard. Then up rode 4 stout burghers of Nottingham town, for this was the only inn within 5 miles' distance, and they did not care to be caught in such a thunderstorm as this that was coming upon them. Leaving their nags to the stableman, they entered the best room of the inn, where fresh green rushes lay all spread upon the floor, and there called for the goodliest fare that the place afforded. After having eaten heartily, they bade the landlord show them to their rooms, for they were aweary, having ridden all the way from Dronfield that day. So off they went, grumbling at having to sleep 2 in a bed, but their troubles on this score, as well as all others, were soon lost in the quietness of sleep. And now came the first gust of wind, rushing past the place, clapping and banging the doors and shutters, smelling of the coming rain, and all wrapped in a cloud of dust and leaves. As though the wind had brought a guest along with it, the door opened of a sudden, and in came a friar of Emmet Priory, and one in high degree, as was shown by the softness and sleekness of his robes and the richness of his rosary. He called to the landlord, and bade him first have his mule well fed and bedded in the stable, and then to bring him the very best there was in the house. So presently a savory stew of tripe and onions, with sweet little fat dumplings, was set before him, likewise a good stout pottle of malmsey, and straightway the holy friar fell to with great courage and heartiness, so that in a short time naught was left but a little pool of gravy in the centre of the platter, not large enough to keep the life in a starving mouse. In the meantime the storm broke. Another gust of wind went rushing by, and with it fell a few heavy drops of rain, which presently came rattling down in showers, beating against the casements like a little 100 hands. Bright flashes of lightning lit up every raindrop, and with them came cracks of thunder that went away grumbling and bumping, as though Saint Swithin were busy rolling great casks of water across rough ground overhead. The women folks screamed, and the merry wags in the tap room put their arms around their waists to soothe them into quietness. At last the holy friar bade the landlord show him to his room, but when he heard that he was to bed with a cobbler, he was as ill-contented a fellow as you could find in all England. Nevertheless, there was nothing for it, and he must sleep there or nowhere. So, taking up his candle, he went off, grumbling like the now distant thunder. When he came to the room where he was to sleep, he held the light over Robin and looked at him from top to toe. Then he felt better pleased, for instead of a rough, dirty-bearded fellow, he beheld as fresh and clean a lad as one could find in a week of Sundays. So, slipping off his clothes, he also huddled into the bed, where Robin, grunting and grumbling in his sleep, made room for him. Robin was more sound asleep, I wot, than he had been for many a day, else he would never have rested so quietly with one of the friar's sort so close beside him. As for the friar, had he known who Robin Hood was, you may well believe he would almost as soon have slept with an adder as with the man he had for a bedfellow. So the night passed comfortably enough, but at the first dawn of day Robin opened his eyes and turned his head upon the pillow. Then how he gaped and how he stared, for there beside him lay one all shaven and shorn, so that he knew it must be a fellow in holy orders. He pinched himself sharply, but finding he was awake, sat up in bed, while the other slumbered as peacefully as though he were safe and sound at home in Emmet Priory. "Now," quoth Robin to himself, "I wonder how this thing hath dropped into my bed during the night." So saying, he arose softly, so as not to waken the other, and looking about the room he espied the friar's clothes lying upon a bench near the wall. First he looked at the clothes, with his head on one side, then he looked at the friar, and slowly winked an eye. Quoth he, "Good brother, whate'er thy name may be, as thou hast borrowed my bed so freely, I'll e'en borrow thy clothes in return." So saying, he straightway donned the holy man's garb, but kindly left the cobbler's clothes in the place of it. Then he went forth into the freshness of the morning, and the stableman that was up and about the stables opened his eyes as though he saw a green mouse before him, for such men as the friars of Emmet were not wont to be early risers, but the man bottled his thoughts, and only asked Robin whether he wanted his mule brought from the stable. "Yea, my son," quoth Robin, albeit he knew naught of the mule, "and bring it forth quickly, I prithee, for I am late and must be jogging." So presently the stableman brought forth the mule, and Robin mounted it and went on his way rejoicing. As for the holy friar, when he arose he was in as pretty a stew as any man in all the world, for his rich soft robes were gone, likewise his purse with 10 golden pounds in it, and naught was left but patched clothes and a leathern apron. He raged and swore like any layman, but as his swearing mended nothing, and the landlord could not aid him, and as, moreover, he was forced to be at Emmet Priory that very morning upon matters of business, he was fain either to don the cobbler's clothes or travel the road in nakedness. So he put on the clothes, and still raging and swearing vengeance against all the cobblers in Derbyshire, he set forth upon his way afoot. But his ills had not yet done with him, for he had not gone far ere he fell into the hands of the King's men, who marched him off willy-nilly to Tutbury Town and the Bishop of Hereford. In vain he swore he was a holy man, and showed his shaven crown. Off he must go, for nothing would do but that he was Robin Hood. Meanwhile, merry Robin rode along contentedly, passing safely by 2 bands of the King's men, until his heart began to dance within him because of the nearness of Sherwood. So he travelled ever on to the eastward, till of a sudden he met a noble knight in a shady lane. Then Robin checked his mule quickly, and leaped from off its back. "Now well met, Sir Richard of the Lea," cried he, "for rather than any other man in England would I see thy good face this day." Then he told Sir Richard all the happenings that had befallen him, and that now at last he felt himself safe, being so nigh to Sherwood again. But when Robin had done, Sir Richard shook his head sadly. "Thou art in greater danger now, Robin, than thou hast yet been," said he. "For before thee lie bands of the sheriff's men, blocking every road, and letting none pass through the lines without examining them closely. I myself know this, having passed through them but now. Before thee lies the sheriff's men, and behind thee the King's men, and thou canst not hope to pass either way, for by this time they will know of thy disguise, and will be in waiting to seize upon thee. My castle and everything within it are thine, but naught could be gained there, for I could not hope to hold it against such a force as is now in Nottingham of the King's and Sheriff's men." Having so spoken, Sir Richard bent his head in thought, and Robin felt his heart sink within him like that of the fox that hears the hounds at his heels, and finds his den blocked with earth, so that there is no hiding for him. But presently Sir Richard spoke again, saying, "One thing thou canst do, Robin, and one only. Go back to London and throw thyself upon the mercy of our good Queen Eleanor. Come with me straightway to my castle. Doff these clothes, put on such as my retainers wear. Then I will hie me to London town with a troop of men behind me, and thou shalt mingle with them, and thus will I bring thee to where thou mayest see and speak with the Queen. Thy only hope is to get to Sherwood, for there none can reach thee, and thou wilt never get to Sherwood but in this way." So Robin went with Sir Richard of the Lea, and did as he said, for he saw the wisdom of that which the knight advised, and that this was his only chance of safety. Queen Eleanor walked in her royal garden, amid the roses that bloomed sweetly, and with her walked 6 of her ladies in waiting, chattering blithely together. Of a sudden a man leaped up to the top of the wall from the other side, and then, hanging for a moment, dropped lightly upon the grass within. All the ladies in waiting shrieked at the suddenness of his coming, but the man ran to the Queen and kneeled at her feet, and she saw that it was Robin Hood. "Why, how now, Robin?" cried she. "Dost thou dare to come into the very jaws of the raging lion? Alas, poor fellow, thou art lost indeed if the King finds thee here. Dost thou not know he is seeking thee through all the land?" "Yea," quoth Robin, "I do know right well that the King seeks me, and therefore I have come. For surely no ill can befall me when he hath pledged his royal word to your majesty for my safety. Moreover, I know your majesty's kindness and gentleness of heart, and so I lay my life freely in your gracious hands." "I take thy meaning, Robin Hood," said the Queen, "and that thou dost convey reproach to me, as well thou mayest, for I know that I have not done by thee as I ought to have done. I know right well that thou must have been hard pressed by peril to leap so boldly into one danger to escape another. Once more I promise thee mine aid, and will do all I can to send thee back in safety to Sherwood Forest. Bide thou here till I return." So saying, she left Robin in the garden of roses and was gone a long time. When she came back, Sir Robert Lee was with her, and the Queen's cheeks were hot, and the Queen's eyes were bright, as though she had been talking with high words. Then Sir Robert came straight forward to where Robin Hood stood, and he spoke to the yeoman in a cold, stern voice. Quoth he, "Our gracious sovereign the King hath mitigated his wrath toward thee, fellow, and hath once more promised that thou shalt depart in peace and safety. Not only hath he promised this, but in 3 days he will send one of his pages to go with thee and see that none arrest thy journey back again. Thou mayest thank thy patron saint that thou hast such a good friend in our noble Queen, for but for her persuasion and arguments thou hadst been a dead man, I can tell thee. Let this peril that thou hast passed through teach thee 2 lessons. First, be more honest. Second, be not so bold in thy comings and goings. A man that walketh in the darkness as thou dost may escape for a time, but in the end he will surely fall into the pit. Thou hast put thy head in the angry lion's mouth, and yet thou hast escaped by a miracle. Try it not again." So saying, he turned and left Robin and was gone. For 3 days Robin abided in London in the Queen's household, and at the end of that time the King's head page, Edward Cunningham, came, and taking Robin with him, departed northward upon his way to Sherwood. Now and then they passed bands of the King's men coming back again to London, but none of those bands stopped them, and so at last they reached the sweet, leafy woodlands. This is the end of chapter 19.